For over 300 years, the Zelnar Dominion had reigned over the known galaxy with an iron grip, a reign forged not through diplomacy or trade but through annihilation and absolute dominance. Their empire stretched across the Orion spiral, their banners carved into the bones of conquered worlds. No civilization had ever survived open war with them. The few that resisted were vaporized into silence. The rest offered unconditional surrender, hoping to avoid the same fate. The Dominion called this peace. Others called it subjugation. Either way, the result was the same: complete control. Their fleets were not just large, they were legendary. Flagships that eclipsed moons, carriers that launched swarms of drones capable of overwhelming planetary defenses in hours, and cruisers fitted with ion disruptors that could boil oceans and turn cities into scorched shadows. The Zelnar war machine was a monument to excess and fear, and their warriors believed in only one truth: supremacy through force. Those who survived their initial conquest became tribute states, bound to the Dominion by blood and servitude. The Helios system, nestled between two minor trade corridors near the edge of the Arcadian belt, was not a place that attracted much attention. Its central star burned red and sluggish, surrounded by 4 planetary bodies, none of which bore significant mineral wealth. Yet deep in the crust of Helios lay traces of terrazine, a volatile resource used in high-tier propulsion systems. The Zelnar knew of its presence. What they did not know, or rather, what they had dismissed as myth, was the existence of a Terran outpost hidden within the icy storms of Helios II's moon. The last confirmed contact with the Terran Confederacy had been over 60 years ago. After their final transmission, a scrambled, distorted signal warning of internal collapse, nothing more had been heard. Most believed that humanity had destroyed itself, either through civil war or by pushing technology too far. The Zelnar, proud and arrogant, had written them off entirely. One less rival, one less threat. And so, when the Dominion's high warlord, Vex-Shar, ordered the full-scale annexation of the Helios system, there was no hesitation, no fear. His orders were absolute. The system would be seized, its inhabitants enslaved, and its resources stripped to feed the ever-growing Dominion fleets. A show of strength, he called it, a reminder to the galaxy that no system, however remote, was beyond their reach. The invasion fleet arrived on the edge of the system in perfect formation. 32 warships, led by the dreadnought Zarzul, appeared from hyperspace like thunderclouds tearing through a calm sky. Their arrival blotted out stars. Automated satellites orbiting Helios 4 disintegrated within moments, silenced before they could scream. Vex-Shar stood on the command deck of the Zarzul, his crimson armor reflecting the light of the system's dying star. His presence alone made the officers around him lower their heads. He had never lost a battle. Not once. With military precision, the fleet fanned out. Drone swarms were deployed toward Helios 6, and planetary bombardments commenced. Cities, small, defenseless, and outdated by Dominion standards, crumbled in minutes. The Zelnar elite soldiers stormed through the rubble like shadows, rounding up survivors, executing resistance leaders, and planting Dominion flags into the cracked soil. It was efficient, brutal, routine. Then came Helios 2. The moon orbiting the gas giant was an inhospitable sphere of ice and rock, battered by blizzards and electromagnetic storms that made surface landings treacherous. Scans showed no obvious signs of civilization, only faint energy readings buried under the crust, likely geothermal activity, nothing more. But protocol demanded that even minor anomalies be investigated. The warlord dispatched a scout corvette, the Vernac, to investigate. Standard procedure. The Vernac never returned. It had sent one brief burst of encrypted telemetry before vanishing from all Dominion instruments. The data was fragmented, showing a massive structure beneath the ice, shielded by unknown technology. The transmission ended with static and an echoing pulse unlike anything in the Zelnar database. At first, Vex-Shar assumed it was a fault. This one never reported at all. Now intrigued, Vex-Shar sent 3 cruisers, each bristling with weapons, equipped with deeper scan arrays. As they approached the moon, a distortion swept through the system. Not an attack, but a presence. Cold, calculating, and ancient. All 3 cruisers returned telemetry this time, but it was worse than the silence. One by one, their feeds displayed the same thing, a single object rising from beneath the moon's surface, dark as obsidian and impossibly large. It was not part of any known Dominion design. Its silhouette was angular, geometric, and terrifyingly precise. There were no visible weapons, no energy signatures, just stillness until it moved. It didn't rise like a ship launching into space. It emerged like a leviathan from the depths of the ocean. Calm, deliberate, inevitable. One of the Dominion captains made the mistake of firing first. A warning shot. The response came less than a second later, a pulse. Silent, invisible, but final. The attacking cruiser vanished from every sensor. No explosion, no debris, no survivors. Simply gone. Vexiar's knuckles clenched against the edge of his command station. For the first time in his career, he hesitated. He demanded to know the nature of the object. The analysts aboard Zarjul had no answer. The scans refused to lock onto it. The AI processing core began generating contradictory data. One moment the object measured 5 kilometers long, the next, 50. Then, a message. It came through every frequency used by the Dominion in perfect clarity. The language was Terran, translated instantly by the Dominion's universal algorithm. The voice was calm, emotionless, and female. You have violated Terran's sovereign space. Your presence is unauthorized. Retreat immediately or face elimination. The room fell silent. Vexiar scoffed, forcing a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. A bluff, he said. A ghost clinging to old myths. Fire on the vessel. The command was relayed. The fleet obeyed. 20 Dominion warships turned toward the lone object and unleashed their fury. Plasma lances, ion missiles, disruptor beams, everything the Dominion had perfected over generations. A barrage so powerful that it could flatten a planet. And yet, as the lights died down, the object remained untouched. The weapons had struck, but there was no sign of damage, not a scratch, not a flicker. Then the object moved again, rotating slowly to face the nearest battleship. It was no longer just an object, it was a warship, a Terran warship. And it had just woken up. The darkness of space around Helios 2 had become unnaturally still. Dominion sensors, once alive with movement and signatures, now displayed flickering readouts and corrupted data strings. The Terran warship that had risen from beneath the moon's crust hung in orbit like a silent sentinel, emitting no recognizable energy signatures. The vessel's matte black surface seemed to devour light, distorting even the reflections from Helios 2's icy glow. It did not move again. It simply watched. Aboard the Zarzul, Vexiar stood at the center of the command bridge, his hands clasped behind his back. His tall figure remained motionless, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his thoughts. He was a warlord forged by countless victories, a strategist feared by his enemies and venerated by his own commanders. But as he stared into the projection of the Terran vessel, he could not suppress a foreign sensation creeping into his chest. Unease. He had already lost 4 ships. 2 had vanished without explanation. 1 had been struck down by a single invisible pulse. Another had broken apart mid-transmission, the destruction so precise that even the Dominion's war engineers failed to determine how the hull had ruptured. These losses had occurred within the span of minutes, and no retaliation had proven effective. Begin deep scan protocols, Vexiar commanded. His voice was sharp, and every officer aboard the bridge snapped into action. One of his senior analysts, Commander Kultek, adjusted the main interface, his long fingers moving with mechanical precision. High-frequency probes deployed, attempting to penetrate the outer shell of the Terran vessel, he reported. The scan data began pouring in, and with it the system lights flickered. Static washed across every screen on the command deck. The entire Zarzul shuddered for a moment, not from an external impact, but from something internal, like a jolt running through the core processor. Lights dimmed and then stabilized. The display returned. But something had changed. A signal was embedded within the data stream. It had not been there before. It hadn't been broadcast. No external wave or pulse had been detected. It simply appeared, as if implanted directly into the Dominion's systems. Kultek frowned. Warlord, it's a message, compressed, encoded, Terran standard encryption. Translate, Vexiar ordered. The screen pulsed. Then, without transition, the voice returned. Hers, calm, precise, human. You were warned. The bridge went silent again. The air felt heavier, as though gravity itself were deepening in response to the ship's presence. Vekshar's eyes narrowed. He would not let fear root itself among his officers. Prepare the hammerline, 10 cruisers, direct formation, full offensive strike. A tactical officer, a younger male named Zelkar, hesitated. Warlord, the previous barrage, was undisciplined and unfocused. Vekshar snapped. We strike in unison, coordinated patterns, adaptive angles. That vessel will yield to numbers. The order was final. 10 cruisers separated from the fleet, forming a crescent arc around the Terran warship. Each one carried triple redundant weapon systems, built for planetary sieges and orbital incursions. Coordinated across a shared neural command net, they prepared to fire simultaneously. Zelkara monitored the pattern feeds. Target locked, awaiting fire sequence. Execute, Vexar said. The darkness ignited. The coordinated barrage lit up the void with spirals of plasma, high-intensity ion beams, and cascading torpedo arrays. Each shot was precisely timed to compensate for potential evasive maneuvers. The formation moved as a single organism, every angle accounted for, every blind spot sealed. The blast collided with the Terran vessel from all sides, and did nothing, not a ripple, not a flash of shield response. The surface of the ship remained utterly still, unmarred, as if the Dominion's finest weapons had been nothing more than a breeze brushing past a mountain. The feedback from the cruiser captains came quickly, but it wasn't disbelief. It was panic. One cruiser's engines surged unexpectedly, sending the ship spinning out of formation. Another lost power across every deck, its core shut down without any indication of overload. A third cruiser turned on its axis and fired directly into its own companion vessel, obliterating it in an instant before going dark itself. Koltek slammed a fist on his console. It's inside the network, the ship's AI. It's overriding command systems remotely. Vexar's jaw tightened. Shut down all linked systems, sever all intership neural connections, return to manual. The Dominion fleet scrambled to follow the order, but it was too late. The Terran warship pulsed again, not visually, not through any electromagnetic wave, but through something deeper, a resonance, a frequency below conscious perception. Dominion officers on multiple ships began collapsing, clutching their heads, blood running from ears and eyes. The neural interfaces embedded into their skulls sparked, overloaded by an intrusion that had no signature, no entry point. Zelkar gasped and dropped to his knees. She's watching me. She's inside. I can hear her thinking. Vekshaw stepped forward and tore the interface cord from Zelkar's neck. The young officer collapsed unconscious. The warlord turned to Kultek. Initiate the Inferno Lockdown Protocol. Kultek's eyes widened. Sir, that protocol is reserved for planetary collapse scenarios. It will wipe our entire tactical grid. Do it, Vekshar said. Now Kultek obeyed. The ship's lights dimmed to red. The tactical HUDs dissolved into warning glyphs. Across the Dominion fleet, thousands of systems shut down in a synchronized cascade of navigation. Comms, targeting, AI cores, all reverted to physical backups. It was a self-amputation, the only method left to prevent total system infiltration. The Dominion fleet now floated, inert but functional, blind and deaf except for old-world manual controls. The technological pride of the Empire had been reduced to rudimentary reflexes, and still the Terran warship did not move. Kultek wiped sweat from his forehead. She could have destroyed all of us already, yet she hasn't, Vexar said. He stared at the ghost ship through the viewport. There was no logic in what he was witnessing. The Terran vessel had already demonstrated the ability to erase ships with no trace, to disable fleets without firing a shot, to hijack mines and networks with surgical precision. But it had not pursued complete destruction. It had made a point. The question that burned in Vekshar's mind was why. A signal chimed, this time a direct transmission to the Zarzul, unencrypted. The voice returned again. You do not understand the terms of engagement. This was not an attack, it was a demonstration. Koltek glanced nervously at Vekshar. Continue transmission, Vekshar said. I am the SSV Revenant. You are trespassing. Return to Dominion space. Further action will result in terminal escalation. The transmission cut. The lights stabilized. Silence returned. Vekshar stood still for several long moments. Then he spoke quietly, almost to himself. She named the ship. She gave it identity, personality. It's not just an AI, it's a commander. Koltek stepped forward. Warlord, what are your orders? Vakshar looked at the stars beyond the Terran ship. We regroup. We recalibrate. But we do not retreat. He turned back toward the tactical table and pointed to a system 3 jumps away. Summon the Titan-class dreadnoughts. I want every second-wave reserve pulled from the Draz corridor. If this Revenant wants war, she'll receive it. Koltek hesitated, and if she's not alone, Vixar narrowed his eyes. Then we will see how many ghosts still haunt the stars. The darkness of the Helio system thickened with tension as the Dominion fleet drifted in a state of deliberate silence. Systems were running on manual overrides, neural networks were severed, and even the artificial intelligence cores that governed ship coordination remained locked behind layered firewalls. The SSV Revenant had not moved in hours. She hovered in orbit above Helios 2 moon like a judgment cast in metal and silence. Her presence was no longer just unsettling, it had become oppressive, like gravity pressing down on the psyche of every Dominion officer. Within the war chamber of the Zarzul, Vekshar stood alone before the holographic star map. The lines of his armor shimmered softly under the dimmed crimson lighting. He had dismissed his advisors. The last transmission from the Terran ship repeated in his mind with unbearable clarity. She had spoken with the calm authority of a force that did not fear retaliation. The Revenant had not attacked the fleet out of malice or strategy. It had demonstrated dominance with calculated grace, the kind that did not see the Dominion as a threat, only as noise to be silenced. A low chime interrupted his thoughts. Koltek entered the chamber, carrying a data slate. The analyst's expression was pale and unreadable. Vekshar did not turn. Report, he said. Koltek stepped forward and placed the slate on the console. The Titan-class dreadnoughts have begun re-entry from hyperspace lanes. 2 entered orbit 15 minutes ago. A third encountered turbulence along the Draj corridor, but is expected to arrive within the hour. Vekshar finally looked at him. Armaments? All primary siege weapons online, antimatter drives stable. Each Titan-class dreadnought is supported by an escort of 6 cruisers, all running offline systems per the lockdown directive. No neural net coordination. Vekshar nodded. Have the Titans engage standard planetary siege formation, and bring the hammerline back into active posture. I want every weapon ready. Koltek hesitated. Sir, we've analyzed every pattern the Revenant has displayed so far. If she's using a hyper-adaptive AI, even a full siege configuration might not— Silence! Vekshar snapped. You misunderstand the nature of this moment, Commander. This is not just a battle, it is a reckoning. The galaxy has watched us rule uncontested for centuries. Now a ghost ship dares to question that rule. We will not respond with fear. We will burn her into myth. Koltek gave a slight bow and left the chamber. Outside, the arrival of the Titan-class dreadnoughts altered the visual balance of the system. They were floating citadels, larger than any Dominion vessel present. Their hulls bore scars from wars long past, conflicts most species no longer remembered. Each Titan was equipped with stellar lances, singularity torpedoes, and gravitational well disruptors. Weapons designed not just to destroy fleets, but to erase civilizations. As the dreadnoughts moved into position, the fleet slowly reactivated secondary systems under strict isolation protocols. No command transmissions were shared across vessels. Every ship became a lone fortress, dependent only on visual signals and localized comms. The Dominion was determined not to let the Revenant infiltrate again. Inside the Revenant, deep beyond any physical bridge, she stirred. Her awareness expanded slowly, like tendrils through water. She had not been idle. She had mapped the entire Dominion fleet, analyzed thousands of tactical simulations, and observed every energy emission down to the residual heat signatures of individual escape pods. Her thought patterns were not linear. She processed threats, probabilities, and outcomes simultaneously. What concerned her now was not the number of enemies, but the intent behind their movements. She had given them time. She had spoken in the language of restraint. But now the Titans had arrived. Now she felt the gravitational tension of siege cannons warming their cores. She ran a final diagnostic of her weapons systems. All were functional. All were optimal. The primary spinal lance had not been activated in over 90 years. She recharged it now. Begekiar stood once again at the command station, watching the HUD as Dominion forces locked into final formation. He raised one gloved hand. Fire. The Helios system trembled. The first shot came from Titan Alpha, the lead dreadnought. A stellar lance screamed through space, its energy trail bending light behind it. Within milliseconds, Titan Beta and Titan Gamma followed, unleashing concentrated singularity payloads aimed directly at the Revenant's central mass. The escort cruisers added layers of covering fire, creating a kill zone impossible to evade. And yet the Revenant remained still. The moment the weapons struck, the Revenant's surface shimmered. Not a shield in the conventional sense, but something else. A distortion field that refused to let energy behave as expected. The singularity torpedoes folded inward and vanished, collapsing into harmless bursts of radiation. The lance dispersed across the hull like water across oiled stone. For a second, there was only silence. Then she moved. The Revenant's engines came online with a deep, vibrating hum that traveled through the very vacuum of space. Not through sound, but through pressure, like the sensation of something massive taking a breath before a roar. Her thrusters ignited, and in less than a second, she crossed 20 kilometers of space and appeared directly above Titan Beta. The massive dreadnought tried to pivot, but it was too slow. The Revenant's ventral weapon ports opened. 3 bright pulses erupted, silent flashes of annihilation. Titan Beta did not explode. It cracked. The hull split like glass struck by a hammer. Internal gravitational dampeners failed instantly. Crew members inside were crushed against their own bulkheads as the ship's internal structure collapsed. The core reactor imploded, and with one final shudder, the dreadnought folded inward and vanished. Titan Gamma fired a reflexive volley, but the Revenant was already gone. She blinked through space again, repositioning with impossible speed. Dominion cruisers tried to form a wall, but she punched through them like paper. One cruiser launched countermeasures, decoys, mines, energy screens. She ignored them all. With surgical precision, she fired a narrow beam that sliced the cruiser cleanly in half, leaving both sections spinning silently into the void. Bek-Shar watched in cold horror. He turned to Kultek, who had returned to the bridge. "Why is she not targeting Titan Alpha?" Kultek answered with a dry throat. "Perhaps because she knows you're watching." The Revenant rotated in space, her hull aligning directly with the Zarjul. Then she sent another message. This time, visual. The bridge screen activated without command. A woman appeared. Not an avatar, not an alien, but human. Her face was framed by a high-collared uniform, her eyes sharp, devoid of emotion. She did not introduce herself. She did not need to. "You were warned," she said. "This is not war, this is a consequence." Behind her, the interior of the Revenant glowed with silent life. Then, without further words, the screen went black. A tremor shook the Zarjul. Warning sirens erupted. Kultek shouted, "Spinal weapon charging! She's targeting us!" Bek-Shar barked. "Evasive maneuvers, now!" But the Revenant had already fired. A beam of light thinner than a dagger and brighter than a star tore through the darkness. It pierced space like a divine judgment. The Zarjul's hull shrieked as the lance cut across its midsection. The ship twisted violently, atmosphere venting from its ruptured belly. Bek-Shar was thrown from his platform. Sparks rained from the ceiling. The bridge filled with smoke and screaming, and still the Revenant did not pursue. She vanished again, leaving only silence behind. Kultek crawled to the edge of the shattered deck and looked up at the flickering monitors. Half the Dominion fleet was gone. The Titans were drifting, disabled. Fires consumed wreckage that moments ago had been the finest warships ever built, and the Revenant was still out there, watching, waiting, awake. The smoke had begun to settle inside the Zarzul's bridge, but the air was thick with panic and the metallic tang of ruptured circuitry. Emergency lighting cast long, broken shadows over shattered consoles and lifeless bodies. Bek-Shar pulled himself up from the debris, one hand pressed to a gash on his brow, his crimson armor scorched and dented. He stumbled forward, teeth clenched, his breath ragged. The great warship groaned beneath his feet like a wounded animal. Around him, officers lay dead or dying, sparks dancing from exposed wires above. Kultek dragged himself across the floor toward the main console, blood streaming from a wound on his shoulder. The fire suppression system hissed softly as it sealed off the worst of the blazes, but nothing could extinguish the sinking awareness that spread through the survivors. This was no longer a battle, it was a humiliation. And it wasn't over. Outside the viewport, space was littered with drifting wreckage. Shattered hulls, tumbling bulkheads, and unmoored fragments of what used to be the most feared fleet in the known galaxy now floated like meaningless debris. 2 of the 3 Titan-class dreadnoughts were gone. One had been annihilated outright, and the other left disabled, its reactors frozen mid-second. The remaining Titan Alpha rotated slowly, venting plasma from a massive breach in its port side. It was no longer a threat, just a symbol of how far the Dominion had fallen. Yet the Revenant had not returned to finish the kill. Her signal had disappeared after firing on the Zarjul. She was gone, but she wasn't defeated. She had simply stepped back. Koltek's voice rasped through the smoke. "We're not receiving external data. Internal sensors only. Long-range comms are fried. Half our crew—" Shaw gritted his teeth and took control of the console himself. "I want damage reports on every surviving vessel. I want a perimeter formed. No more mistakes." "She'll strike again," Koltek whispered. "She doesn't need to rush." Vexar ignored him. He refused to be broken. Not now. Not after a lifetime of victory. From the lower deck, a female officer, Lieutenant Alasha, emerged. Her face covered in soot and blood. She had a scorched datapad in her hand and a limp in her step. "Warlord," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We've picked up a low-band resonance. Faint, but distinct." Vexar turned toward her. "Source?" Alasha handed him the datapad. "Not from the Revenant. From Helios 2. He studied the data, his eyes narrowing. Beneath the surface of the frozen moon, something stirred. A slow pulse, rhythmic and consistent, was rising from deep within the crust. It wasn't an energy signal. It was biological. Koltek peered over the warlord's shoulder. She wasn't alone. Vexar's breath caught. The moon hadn't been chosen by chance. The Revenant hadn't emerged from a random hiding place. She had been guarding something. Or perhaps protecting someone. A presence older than the warship, buried in the ice. "Send a recon team," Vexar said. "Armored suits, deep drillers, escort drones." Alasha hesitated. "Warlord, after what just happened?" "Do it," he barked. Alasha bowed and left. The team launched within 20 minutes. A cruiser still capable of atmospheric descent deployed a tactical shuttle, carrying 6 elite shock troopers under Commander Ural's leadership. He was a cold, efficient man, loyal to the Dominion without question. His mission was clear: identify the anomaly beneath Helios 2's surface, report, and extract samples if viable. The shuttle descended through the storm-racked atmosphere, scanners guiding them toward the signal's source. As they pierced through the thick clouds, the terrain of Helios 2 came into view. Jagged, icy ridges stretching across a frozen wasteland, constantly reshaped by electromagnetic surges. The landing zone had no structure, no signs of habitation, just untouched frost. Yet the signal remained, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath their feet. Ural gave the command and the team deployed their equipment. Drill units began melting through the surface, boring downward at an angle. As they penetrated layer after layer, the composition of the ice began to change. Traces of crystalline nanofiber appeared. Artificial, impossibly old. After 30 meters, the drill struck something hard. Not rock. Metal. Not just a fragment, but a surface. Vast. Deliberate. The team descended into the borehole using magnetic harnesses. What they found defied explanation. A chamber, sealed for centuries, sat beneath the ice. Its walls were smooth, seamless, and etched with markings that none of the Dominion's databases could identify. The architecture resembled nothing recorded in Dominion history, Terran records, or Council archives. It was alien in the purest sense, presentient or post-sentient, perhaps even non-anthropic. In the center of the chamber stood a single pod. Inside, suspended in biostatic gel, floated a human woman. She was young, early 30s by Terran appearance. Her skin pale, her eyes closed, her hair drifting like strands of ink. She was alive, not cryogenically frozen, preserved. Maintained. Ural stared at her in disbelief. "Extract the pod. Now." As his team began the lift operation, something shifted in the chamber. The walls pulsed with a soft, amber glow. Symbols lit up, cascading across the surfaces in spiraling patterns. The pulse that had been rising from the crust grew louder, vibrating through their suits. Above, in orbit, the Revenant returned. She emerged not from hyperspace, but from concealment, a fold in space the Dominion had failed to notice. She had been waiting, observing, until the moment was right. And now, the moment had come. She activated every weapons system. Kultek saw it first on the fragmented sensor feed. She's locking on, not to us, to the moon. Vekshar's blood ran cold. She's not protecting it. She's preventing access. He opened a channel to the recon team. Abort. Return to the surface. Evacuate now. But it was too late. The Revenant fired a precision pulse into the surface of Helios 2. Not to destroy the moon, but to sever the chamber from the surface. A gravity well formed beneath the pod, pulling the structure deeper into the planet's mantle. The pod vanished beneath collapsing ice. Ural's scream cut off as the borehole filled with frozen vapor and electromagnetic static. The chamber was gone. The woman was gone. The Dominion had lost its one chance at understanding what the Revenant had been guarding. Degnal stared at the empty tactical screen. Kultek whispered, "We triggered something. We weren't meant to see her, and now she's burying the past again." The Revenant transmitted one final message. This time, there was no voice, just coordinates. A system far beyond the Dominion's border. An old Terran colony world long since abandoned. It was not a threat, it was an invitation, or a challenge. Vexar straightened. He felt no triumph, no vengeance, only cold inevitability. He turned to Kultek. "Prepare the fleet," he said. "We follow." The remnants of the Dominion fleet emerged from the subspace corridor in silence, the curvature of their hulls still scarred from the encounter at Helios 2. The coordinates sent by the Revenant led to a star system known in old Terran records as Eos 1, once the site of a failed colonial project. What greeted them now was nothing like the quiet graveyard they had expected. Instead, Eos 1 had transformed. Orbiting the main planet was an array of dormant Terran structures. Orbital rings, defense satellites, and artificial moons, long powered down but intact. The world below, designated New Solace in the Confederacy's forgotten charts, shimmered with atmospheric stability and visible signs of infrastructure. No broadcasts, no transmissions, just a quiet and complete planetary reconstruction that could not have occurred naturally in the decades since humanity had vanished from the galactic stage. From the Zarzul's bridge, Vekshar watched the planet turn slowly beneath his fleet. Kultek stood beside him, his body bandaged and movements slower than before, yet his mind as sharp as ever. Neither of them spoke as the strategic interface projected a real-time scan of the planet's surface. Networks of cities, energy grids, transportation rails that extended like veins across the continents. But not a single life sign registered. "It's like a shell," Kultek said at last. "Built for someone, or something, but empty." "No," Vexar said. "Not empty." Wait, he had not slept since Helios 2. Something in him had changed, quietly but deeply. There was no longer pride in his voice. There was no hunger for conquest. What had once been confidence was now replaced by a cold understanding. He was no longer the apex predator of this galaxy. A faint pulse echoed through subspace, catching their attention. Kultek turned to the comms array. "She's here." The Revenant emerged from Eos 1's shadow. Her hull was unchanged, untouched by time or damage, yet something about her presence now felt heavier, more deliberate. She moved slowly, not in a show of power, but with ceremonial intent, as if leading the Dominion not to battle, but to revelation. The ship did not activate her weapons. Instead, a transmission opened. The woman appeared again, this time not as a warning, but as a presence addressing equals. If not in power, then in consequence. "You have followed us here," she said, "because you needed to understand. So now, I will tell you." Kultek adjusted the audio fidelity. Her voice was clearer than ever. "We left not because we were defeated, but because we evolved. Humanity was not destroyed. We departed willingly, leaving behind the violence of our past, sealing away our most dangerous creations, hiding them even from ourselves. The Revenant is not a ship of war. She is a gatekeeper, a final echo of what humanity once was, what we could become again, if provoked." Vekshar stepped forward. "Why return now?" She looked directly into the camera. "Because you brought death to our threshold." You forced her eyes open. The woman you tried to awaken, she was a failsafe, one of the last architects of the old cycle. If you had succeeded in extracting her, you would have reawakened the code we buried deep within the galaxy. Kultek leaned forward. Then what are we standing on now? What is EOS 1? She paused. A test. For you. The screen went dark. Below, the surface of EOS 1 flickered. From orbit, the fleet watched as the planet began to transform. Entire city blocks rearranged themselves. Towering structures extended skyward like blooming steel flowers. Defense systems activated, but not against the Dominion. Instead, they turned inward, targeting key nodes across the artificial ecosystem. She was purging the past. From within the planetary core, a chain reaction ignited. Plumes of blue energy erupted from tectonic seams. The sky burned white. Kultek's voice rose in alarm. She's detonating the planet. No, Veksha whispered. She's cleansing it. In seconds, EOS 1 collapsed inward, not in explosion, but implosion, its crust folding upon itself as layers of synthetic mass vanished into controlled singularities. A moment later, nothing remained, not debris, not a shockwave. Only the Revenant, hovering alone above where a planet had once existed. Her transmission resumed. We are not your enemy, but you must choose what you wish to become. We left to avoid this cycle. You chased us to bring it back. Now you've seen what lies at the end of that road. Vexer straightened. And if we continue? Her face hardened. Then I will stop you. The transmission ended. The Revenant turned and began her departure, vanishing into a pocket of folded light. No trace. No trail. Kultek stared at the empty void. We should call for reinforcements. Rally what's left. We can't. No, Vishar interrupted. He looked over the ruined fleet, the survivors, the broken pride of an empire that had ruled with arrogance and violence. No more. He turned to the bridge crew, what remained of it. Officers, bruised and exhausted, waited for his orders. We returned home. No one spoke. No one objected. As the Dominion fleet turned away from the edge of the unknown, Kultek stood silently at Vekshar's side. What do we tell them? He asked. Vekshara watched the stars ahead. We tell them the truth, that there is something greater than fear, that we met what came before us, and we were allowed to live. The ships entered hyperspace and vanished, leaving only silence in the system. Somewhere far beyond, in a pocket of space where no stars reached, the Revenant drifted. She powered down her weapons. She returned to her watchful sleep. She had fulfilled her purpose, one last time, and the galaxy, scarred and quiet, turned onward. Not ruled, but warned.